Great to welcome back to the program today Don Jeffries, who's incorporated a life of experience in different areas into many different books, including Survival of the Richest, which we previously discussed, and most recently, Bullyocracy, which is so relevant in so many ways right now. It's great to have you back on the program.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be back, David.
So I know that let's not dance around the fact that this conversation is very relevant to Donald Trump, but we don't have to talk about Trump, at least not initially. What is your understanding of why certain kids end up becoming bullies?
Well, I think that there is and I cite in the book, there was a study out of England that discovered that, basically the traits we see in every bully are psychopathic type traits. Many of them are. And unfortunately, our society is ruled largely by psychopaths. And if you look at the occupations where psychopathic personalities are predominant, they're all the highest paid professions: doctors, lawyers, CEOs, athletes, entertainers, clergymen, policemen, things like that, which policemen really aren't the most successful, but they have power in terms of. So this is when we look at success, a successful person is indistinguishable often from a bully. They trample on people on the way up. They that's how they get their way. And as long as they win, you look in the sports world, certainly all the best coaches, virtually every one of the most successful coaches, have bullying characteristics. And as long as they win, that's fine. If they don't win, well, there's a problem, and they bring next coach on. But I think our society pays lip service to the fact that we like kindness or whatever. But we don't. I mean, clearly, it's a kindness and empathy are looked at as weak characteristics, where aggressiveness and being able to confront somebody's power, especially in any kind of power, these are the qualities that we admire. And everything about our culture and certainly the business world says that.
Now, there must be, I'm guessing, a sort of circumstantial aspect to this as well. I mean, in other words, there must be something about the circumstances in which all those who might find themselves predisposed to bullying would find themselves in. Some, based on the actual reality they're living, may become bullies, and some may not, right?
Sure. Well, I think the reason why my book is different is, as the subtitle says, I believe it's a social hierarchy that enables bullies. And that's why I'm criticize the school systems especially, because this is where bullying is born. And I don't believe they do anything really to weed out the bullies, because they're not talking about how it's just recent research that has shown us in the past. We kind of had that stereotype. Well, the kid is a bully. Maybe his father's beating him and he's lashing back at the world, or there's alcoholism there. Maybe it's a single mother not watching him, living in a trailer park in poverty or something. That's not the case. Overwhelmingly, the bullies are the popular crowd, and especially in the sports world. And we see the jocks bullying the nerdy types or whatever, the goth crowd. And that's the dynamic you see in every school system. And because of the importance that is placed on sports, it's ironic that we send our kids to school, and it should be theoretically that the kids who are most successful in school are those who get the best grades, because that's why you're going there, right? That's not the case. Very seldom is the class valedictorian a popular kid, unless they also happen to be an athlete, which they could be. Especially females, a lot of the mean girl types do very well, and you have their National Honor Society and things like that. But it's because they don't want to approach the topic of popularity. Because if you have a concept of popularity, everybody knows certain kids are popular. You have to have a contrasting unpopular. There's no such thing as beauty if you don't have ugliness to contrast it with. So I think that is the problem, that those trench coat mafia types have to exist in order for the popular crowd to be basically celebrities in their school. And I document in the book over and over again, as you know, that these school systems, from the teacher to the principals, to the superintendent, to the local media, to law enforcement most of the time, they always poo-poo the claims. They sweep them under the table. Parents will go over and over again to the school systems, name the people who are bullying their child, sometimes physically. Nothing is done about it. And a lot of times I talked to too many parents whose kids killed themselves. They were bully-sided from it. And even afterwards, a lot of the anti-bullying groups even will say, no, it's more complex than that. Even when they in their suicide notes, they'll say, I did this because of bullying, or they'll sometimes even name the actual bullies. They still try to sweep that under the rug. And I think that's the problem, is they're not addressing it correctly. And instead they have these kind of nonsensical zero tolerance and no bully. And those schools, as I point out, actually have more bullying in them than the places that don't advertise that. So I think it's a complex issue, but I don't think anybody until my book was looking at the right culprit here, which I think is the social hierarchy, which creates and enables bullies.
To talk a little bit about the social hierarchy, I remember back when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school, where the popular kids and the bullies were of varied economic backgrounds. In other words,
Right.
you had they were like the rich kids and poor kids and whatever. You had really kind of a mix. More recently, I've talked to a lot of different people who work in school systems in different parts of the country, particularly in suburban settings. Now, this may be different in urban settings or rural, but what a lot of them report is that they see that not necessarily the bullies, but the popular kids tend to be the richest kids. How does that play? Is that a broader phenomenon, and how does that play into the bullying?
Sure. Well, I think and there's a lot of crossover between this book and my book, Survival of the Richest, which you talked about before, because it's certainly wealth has its perks everywhere. And if you're a kid who comes from wealth, you're going to dress better. You're going to have the latest accoutrements. You're going to have, the latest iPad or whatever, your latest cell phone, those kinds of things. You're going to have access to things that are going to make you seem better. And kids are going to want to hang around with you because maybe you live in a nicer house. Maybe you have a big swimming pool in your backyard. So, of course, maybe your parents will pay for their friends to go to some concert or whatever. I mean, all these things are possible there. Whereas if a kid is not wealthy, they might not have a cell phone, or might they have a crappy old cell phone or something. And it's like anything else. It's that's why looks are so important. And I talk a lot about that there, is that the way you can trump economics is to be really good looking. A girl from the other side of the tracks that just is really gorgeous, I don't think too many people are going to be making fun of her economic circumstances. And this is something I think that, again, we don't look at, but I think there's a lot of crossover there. And I think that I've been reminded many times when I wrote this book, it's not to say that every popular kid. I mean, I was interviewed once by a girl saying, I was a homecoming queen. I said, I'm not saying everybody that is popular is a bully, but I think the vast majority of those bullies happen to be popular, and especially the cases that aren't addressed by the teachers and the principals and the superintendents. They're not addressed logically. I think it's because of that popularity. I'll give you a perfect example that I cite in the book. There was a viral video a couple years ago where the guy went to a middle-aged man went to his local school board meeting, and he wanted to talk about the bullying that was going on in the local high school. He said, I went there 25 years ago, or whatever it was. And he said, it was there then. And he pointed the finger at the school superintendent. And he said, you were the one who led the bullying against me. You were the one who stuffed my head in the urinal and things like, and it's shocking to see the stupid grin this superintendent gets on his face. I mean, instantly you could see he got like a memory jolt and he was exposed. But he just kind of, well, I'll tell you, and he just kind of laughed. But you could see it coming back. Now, who knows how many other school superintendents were bullies? So it certainly in that school district, will any claims of bullying be taken seriously if the guy in charge was a vicious bully? And I think we don't know how many people are like that. And I have a whole section in the book where I talk about all the high-profile people in our society. It's from actors to actors in the entertainment world, CEOs, just people that have politicians. And it's astonishing how many of them the overwhelming majority were popular in school. And so if you look at it, like I think the group Bowling for Soup had a song called High School Never Ends. And I think that's kind of the way it is, where that crowd, not all of them, and there are Bill Gates people out there, of course, they're outliers, but if you look at, people don't know Woody Allen, for instance, the quintessential nerd, was actually a great high school baseball and basketball player. So, if you can get some, Rosie O'Donnell was her homecoming queen. So it's not, a lot of times we'll look at it and people don't realize. And so I think they're already The social hierarchy was very good to them. And certainly the Fortune 500 the overwhelming majority of these people went to the high profile fraternities, which I talk about in the book. That's where out of high school, you go to college and it's the fraternities and sororities, the Greek life. That's where you see the next step in building those cliques. And of course, that turns into business cliques because those people go into high profile jobs and they're fraternity brothers. And again, it's this kind of corruption that I write about everywhere else. We see these kind of cliques form, and people that weren't in those fraternities don't have a chance to get in there. And so I think it's a very complex issue, but the fact that it's not addressed at the school level, I think, is the most important thing. And all we're asking is that, somebody, especially when you're bragging about it and saying you have zero tolerance, if somebody comes to you, it's pretty clear cut. If somebody comes to you, and I describe in the book, there was a little girl that came up from kindergarten, that looked like she'd been 15 rounds in the ring with Mike Tyson. And her mother naturally wanted an explanation. Well, the school said she fell.
Mm.
And the girl said, no, this other girl's been picking on me and she pushed me off the slide. So, if that's happening in kindergarten and somebody's covering up, I don't even know what that explanation is, but certainly they need to look at the teachers who are the first line of defense here. There's the first people that could theoretically stop it.
Yeah.
And the principals who aren't backing them up, and then the superintendents. And I describe many, many cases over and over again. The readers' heads will swim looking at them, but it's always the same story. We went over and over and over again. They did nothing about it. In worst case scenarios, my child kills himself. Afterwards, they continue to demonize. They infer maybe it was us, the family, that maybe you were at fault, and they still don't claim any responsibility. So it's a huge issue.
And in the limited time we have left, Don, when we look at some of the behavior we've seen from Donald Trump, which includes certainly bullying people on social media and directing ire at specific individuals, the irony of Melania's anti-bullying campaign, while the behavior of her husband is completely antithetical to that, we've since learned about some elements of Donald Trump's upbringing, including that his dad, at minimum, was verbally abusive. That, there was this attitude of never apologize for anything, never admit that you're wrong, which we've seen Donald Trump take up. What do you make of all of that? Because as you said, it's not always as simple as, oh, the bully is a bully because they're getting bullied at home. But what do you make of the Trump story?
Well, that could have played into part there. And it could just be, again, he comes from great wealth. As my friend Gerald Celente likes to say, he was born on third base and thinks he hit a home run. And there's so many of these guys do that. So somebody like Trump led a life of privilege his entire life. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So it's hard to be humble under those circumstances. Now, in his case, he appears to have had a very weird family dynamic. His mother was, I think, probably just as strange as his father. So I don't know. I think somebody said once that nobody had ever told him that they loved him in his life.
Mm.
And certainly, if you look at the way he kind of trades in supermodel wives every 20 years, I don't think he's ever really looked for love. He's looking for a new model. So I think he's kind of the quintessential superficial guy, the ultimate materialist guy. And his personality, unfortunately, is perfect for our burgeoning idiocracy that we have now. I mean, he's basically, in many ways, he's like President Camacho, if you've seen the movie Idiocracy. I mean, he's got the WWE personality. And what has happened is he has lowered the level of discourse and everybody has joined him. It's a huge food fight. So you have the other side tries to bully him, and they're always down in the gutter. And they're calling each other names, and that's what it's turned into. And it's a shame, but it's not surprising because, people knowing of Trump's personality has been out there for a long time.
Yeah.
You listen to some of the interviews with Howard Stern and stuff. He's really, what was different is the populist rhetoric that a lot of us were attracted to during his campaign. I mean, came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But now, his personality but it's always been packaged in that personality. And I think because he is really attacked constantly. And if he had any kind of a sympathetic personality, I think a lot of people would feel sorry for him because he is attacked, but he just doesn't have any of that. And he lashes. And it's unfortunate that's, I wrote a whole little section in Bullyocracy about the emergence of Trump. And It's fitting, and you're certainly, like you said, his wife has an anti-bullying message, but we see that a lot of the football players, well, they'll put people like Russell Wilson of the Seahawks, who admits what a big bully he was in school. He says, "Yeah, I used to rub kids' nose in the dirt and stuff," and he runs an anti-bullying organization. Now, maybe he's reformed, and a lot of these football players are in charge or sponsor these organizations, and my contention is that football, especially, breeds this bullying because it's manliness and toughness, and if you're going against you're just natural. If you're coming up against a theater crowd, which may have gays in it or whatever, just very not macho guys or whatever, it's going to be natural for those football players to come up and bump against them and just do what they do. And but it's because the schools place so much more emphasis on sports than they do in academics or anything else, and we see in society the role that sports plays in our lives. I mean, sports plays a tremendous amount. Look at all the money that goes into it. What the corporate welfare that I talked about in Survival of the Richest, the most egregious example of that are all the stadiums that taxpayers build, NFL stadiums especially, and MLB stadiums that are paid for completely. And it's because that fan base says, "No, please don't move our team.
Right.
We'll pay for it." And so I think but again, people don't want to equate sports with bullying, because I mean, I'm a huge sports fan. I played sports, I coach sports, I love sports, but I recognize how it breeds this kind of behavior, and especially when it's not held into account.
Yeah, and to be clear, there are gay football players as well. That not that you were suggesting that that there were not, of course.
Right.
The latest book is Bullyocracy. We've been speaking with Donald Jeffries. Don, always great speaking to you. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure.